okay today? We're tired, right? You and me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Welcome to Montalvo. How many of you have never been to Montalvo before? It's your first time. Well, it's a treat to have you here. Montalvo's a nonprofit organization. We have a diversity of programs, multidisciplinary education programs, performing arts series, and a historic Lucas Artists Residency, which was renovated and rebuilt in the early 2004, 2005. We bring in artists from all over the world. They come and spend time here on this ground and in this place and dream about possibilities. These are composers, writers, performers, visual artists, artists working in social practice. And today we're joined by Bruce Munro, and I couldn't be more delighted. Good morning. We've been having a lot of conversations, the two of us, over the last several days, as we welcomed the press, our donors, our sponsors, folks to come and see the show and have a little peek before we open to the public tomorrow night. So I wanted to just take some time to have a conversation with Bruce. And we want to look at kind of what's inspired him, who he is as a man, who he is as an artist, and what brought us to this point. So, Bruce, I wanted to start with this image, which is one of your own, and for you just to tell us a little bit about your childhood. And I want to start all the way back there because what I've discovered is you work in memory. A lot of your work is around memory, and I thought it would be nice to just start at the beginning.
Thank you. Good morning to you all. This photograph is of where I grew up. It's a small town in the southwest of England, in Devonshire, called Salcombe, and I spent most of my youth there, playing around on boats and walking the cliffs and beaches of the estuary. It was a pretty idyllic way to grow up, and I've always been very close to the sea, and I think this is my very first memory of painting. Was always trying to paint the water and capture the water. As a child, I probably, like all children, you want to paint things that look like something, look like the things that you're painting. And I was cross when I made this painting. I think it was about 8, but what I did is, years later when I looked at it, I was at art school, and I thought actually it wasn't as bad as I thought, because it was really about the spirit of water, because as a youngster, I thought that if I pushed the paint around the surface of the paper, magically it would turn into water, or to look like water, and of course it didn't. But then I realised that things aren't always. You don't have to depict something in a sort of trompe-l'oeil way. You can actually get the spirit or the essence of an experience through the feeling of it.
So, as a young man, this is a painting from 8 years old, and I don't have a painting from your early 20s, so I thought I'd use this one. But tell us, you went on to go to art school?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that early experience as an artist.
Art school was really about growing up, and I think for most youngsters, it's not so much about what you learn, or certainly it's about what you learn going from that transition from a child to a young adult. So, in other words, learning to cook for yourself, learning to get yourself from A to B, without your parents always being there. So for me, it was less about the education of art. I always felt, actually, people shouldn't go to art school to become artists. They should just go there to really to study the arts, study other artists, rather than trying to be one. I think there's too much emphasis today on being an artist very young. But, you know, I don't. When you become an artist, I didn't really. Well, I still wonder if I am an artist. You become an artist when you feel that you're an artist, and for that to happen, you have to have a sense of what is important to you to create art. And it's only in the last maybe 15, maybe 20 years that that's really come to my mind. And it's something I never pushed. I didn't want it to be something that was self-indulgent. I wanted it to be something quite truthful.
I would say so. So after art school, you went to Australia. And I know Australia was quite formative for you. And I picked this image with purpose, but we don't need to talk about exactly the place, but more what happened for you in Australia.
Australia, again, was another growing up here. I mean, I've spent my whole life growing up. I'm still not grown up.
That's how I feel.
That, again, was my parents were wonderful in the sense of they just always encouraged me to follow my nose, I guess. And I went out to Australia at 24 and did lots of different jobs. And it was during that time I kind of discovered the medium of light. And I purposely didn't try and create art with it, but I just thought I would use light or try and find out about what light was. The thing about a medium is the more you use it, you start to use it in ways where it becomes second nature and familiar with you. And I had spent 8 years there. I met my wife, then girlfriend or fiancée, Serena, and we had decided that we were going to return to the UK because both our parents were getting on a little bit, and there was a sort of request 8 years after I'd been there for 8 years, said, look, it's time you came home. Well, we'd like to see a bit of you. And so we did this tour around Australia. We bought an old Toyota Corona, which is an old estate wagon, put a tent in the back, and went on this trip. And we came to a place called Uluru, which is behind me, and I don't know if any of you have been here, but it is an incredibly powerful landscape. And this is one of the first times I recognized the power of landscape, in that it literally went through my through my body. You know, when I got there, I just felt there was something tangible in the air coming through the ground. And all I did was I had a sketchbook with me. I just carried it around almost like I've always had these since I was sort of about 15 or 16. And I just noted this experience, and I was trying to describe it. And the only way I could describe it was because it felt electrical. And I was thinking of deserts. Memories from school when you learn about a desert. It rains in a desert, and they're apparently barren places, but when it rains in quick motion, you know, it blooms, it flowers. And I was seeing this in an illuminated way. So I imagined in my mind's eye that there was this sort of pulses running under the ground and sort of root systems, and then coming through the earth. And all I did was put that in my sketchbook. And when I got back to England some months later, and then set up a studio, and I was painting, I had that idea photocopied on a wall in my studio. And a friend came in, and this might have been actually a year or two later. He came into my studio and he said, you know, what's that you're doing? And I said, well, what's that on the wall? And I said, oh, this is this place called Uluru, and I want to create this field of light. And he looked at me and said, come on, Bruce, be realistic. You know, we had 2 babies by then, and, you know, probably Serena might have had one more on the way, and you know, money was in short supply. And he said, look, come on, you've got to get real. You're not going to, you know, get your focus on feeding the family. So, and he was right, but it made me slightly irritated that you know, you have these ideas in life, and my mother was always one of these people who would say exactly. She knew how to you know, get a good reaction from me, and she said, "Don't be a talker, be a doer." And that was always our family motto, and I really agree with that. You know, there's every reason not to get out of bed and do something. You know, there's always an excuse, and I've always been encouraged that if you've got an idea, you make it happen. And so Uluru was a very important part of my life.
So you came to light, right? You came to light as your work, as your practice, and I'd like you to talk a little bit about how you came to it.
Well, the way I saw light was an ability to try and say things that were on my mind and things that fascinated me and connected me to the world. And I recognised probably when I was about 40, my father died when I was 40, and this is the time where it became important, I felt, to start making that this transition. And I've realised that through my life I've had these moments, and I'm sure everybody here has, of clarity, where it could have been reading a book, it could have been driving down a road, it could have been eating a meal, could have been, I don't know, being travelling somewhere, listening to a piece of music. And this particular photograph was of, it's called Water Towers. And again, this was inspired by a book I read when I was 21. And I've realized that there are these moments of clarity which I've kind of, when I look back in retrospect, I thought that was a really important book, or that was a really important event. And I've decided I was going to try and bring those moments to life. So that's really what this is all about.
There's something, though, Bruce, about you learning the possibility of illuminating light, illuminating objects.
Materials. When you don't have a lot of money, you get creative, I think. You know, if money is no object, I think it spoils people. And the thing is that I was always looking. I had all these ideas, but I found that I would be in a supermarket, or I'd be looking at things, and you know, if you look at one of these things, which we see every day, if you see it too much, you don't see it. I realised I was out shopping one day, and I wanted to do this water tower concept, and I'd spent hours designing a module that would create these sort of structures, and then, lo and behold, I was doing some shopping, and I saw a stack of water bottles in a supermarket aisle, and I went, why don't I use bottles? Because and then I started to look at the beauty of a water bottle. I mean, they are, if you just put yourself in, you know, 100 years ago, and you showed somebody a bottle, or maybe not 100 years, a bit more than that, but a plastic bottle is a relatively new invention, and the optical quality of a bottle, you know, this liquid bottle of light, is really beautiful. It's only because we think of it as a everyday object, you know, to quench our thirst. We forget that it does have an aesthetic beauty. And so I then started to look at just simple objects that I could create these installations with.
Go on.
Well, and then it gets a little bit silly, because there are stories behind every installation. Serena and I were living in Sydney for many years, and we're living in a beautiful place called Palm Beach, which is just 40 k's north of Sydney. And every morning we were woken up by a dawn chorus, kookaburras and cockatoos. Now, a cockatoo is an extremely a beautiful bird, but it's got the most awful sound, especially if you've had a few beers the night before. The thing is, I like to draw things together, different thoughts and ideas, and these span a whole lifetime. So if you go forward about 50, in time, I was in Greece with my family on holiday, having a G&T and watching the sun go down, and there was a movement in the corner of my eye. I thought it was a bird, and I turned around and it was a clothes peg on a line, and that gave me the concept of clothes pegs could be birds. Now, I know that it's a bit far-fetched, but not really. Then I started thinking about the days in Australia with the cockatoos. And I started to wonder how many indigenous species of cockatoo there were in Australia. I don't really know why I think like this, but I was thinking, anyway, there are 12. And then I thought, well, how am I going to describe 12 species of cockatoo with the clothes peg? Well, the answer is actually quite simple. You have to make your own clothes pegs, and you divide them in 4, and that way you can get enough combinations to get 12. In fact, you can have a lot more than that. So what I did is I basically created 12 species of cockatoo, and this is a sound light installation, and it's one of the pieces that we have here. It is so we've taped each species of cockatoo, and there is some also human impressions of cockatoos as well, just to add to the richness of it. Now, the reason it's on a hills hoist is because, again, I wanted to give recognition to the wonderful hills hoist. It's the Australian washing clothes line, and there's a slight sort of tongue-in-cheek here because it's the most, it's not really pretty, is it? But it's beautiful. I love it because it kind of made, to me, that was my experience of Australia. Every backyard had a hills hoist. So the final piece of the jigsaw is the lighting technique I used on this was the very first lighting technique that I learnt in Sydney all those years ago, and that's ultraviolet. So this is really a lifetime of thought, little thoughts that are collected rather bird-like, magpie-like, I guess, over a lifetime, and then they're put together in this rather quirky, well, not quirky, sort of hopefully humorous combination.
Thank you. This is a piece that Bruce has placed in our Italianate garden, and I love that you said, there's something also about having these 8 hills hoist in this very formal sort of garden space.
And it's also the gum trees. You see, you've got these gum trees, which are very Australian. There was a real closeness when I came here for the first time. I was, apart from the Narnian aspect, there was this lovely, I felt at home because of the gum trees.
I think it's important just to see how an artist's mind works. A little bit magpie-like, collecting things along the way and then stitching them together. We kept saying, this is not logic-based, this is art. So I'm going to go through these. I'm going to take us back to Uluru, because what year was it that you did the road trip? The camp trip?
1992.
1992. And you imagined that you would one day illuminate that landscape. That was a dream you had.
No, it was a complete miracle. I didn't even, my dream was just simply to make the first iteration of the Field of Light, to realize that. Now, that took me 12 years to do it from that trip. By then, Serena and I had 4 children. We had a big mortgage, and we bought an old farmhouse. It was really derelict, but it had a field. And I really bought it because of the field. I didn't tell Serena, but because I knew that no Somerset farmer was going to let me put a field of light, or if they had, they'd have charged me lots of money, which I didn't have. So I thought, I need a field, and luckily this place that we ended up buying had a 12-acre field, and then we did have some funds on the mortgage, which should have bought carpets and curtains and things that you need. It did get slightly diverted into the Field of Light Fund. Serena was not best pleased. She saw these two young lads out in the field and me, and she said, "What are you doing in the field?" And I said, "Oh, it's a project I'm working on." And she said, "Well, it looks like it's quite expensive. Who's paying for it?" well, we are. But she's forgiven me. But I honestly, I've never done that again. I realised that was not a good thing to do.
It might have been the best thing you ever did.
Well, I don't recommend it if you, I was washing up for a lot of nights.
So it was, you went to art school. In '92, you did the Outback trip through Australia.
Yeah.
You met Uluru, and then you bought Long Knoll. And when was that?
That was in about 2002 to 2003, and then this came
in 2004.
Yeah. So it was a pretty close piece of work. It was, yeah.
So then we leap forward to 2016, and I think just for a real understanding of, we live in Silicon Valley, and things happen here quickly.
Yeah.
3 months, 6 months, we're on to the next idea. But how long and how much thought and time it takes to realize a work, can you tell us what we're looking at?
Well, the reason this happens so long is that first of all, the one I did at Long Knoll was the first one, and I didn't think anything would come of it. I wasn't really doing it for that reason. I was doing it, that feeling of having an itch and you've got to scratch it. Well, I thought, well, if I get rid of this itch, it'll go away. But it didn't. What happened was there was a lady who, we didn't tell anybody about it. We just put it in the field. We live in the middle of nowhere, and people, we're on a lovely walking route, so people would walk past, not many, over a weekend, and they started to ask me what this thing in the field was, and I said, "Look, come back at night and I'll turn the lights on." And a lady who turned up a couple of times, she said, "Look, can I bring a friend?" I said, "Of course you can." And her friend turned up. She needed to drive to the edge of the field. She wasn't very stable on her legs, and she got out of the car, and I was close by, near to the switch, turned the lights on, and then she just burst into tears. Now, I thought I might have upset her in some way, but I went over and said, "Are you all right?" And she just grabbed my hand and said, "Thank you." Now, I never had done anything in my life where I got that sort of reaction. And the fact is that it was an emotional thing for me, because I thought, this is really what art should be doing. It should be actually touching people's feelings and senses. And it should, I realized then it was nothing to do than, it was a language, and it was a way to communicate with people. So that really set me on that journey. And I'm not saying it's been a difficult one, because I know if any, art is not, I wouldn't recommend it for people who, there is this misconception that it's oh, what a lovely life, it's great when things start going and you get these opportunities, but you spend most of your life, and most artists will be struggling, and if they're lucky, they just get a few opportunities. So you've got to be quite tenacious, I think, to just keep going.
How many of you have seen Bruce Munro's work before? How many of you have seen a field of light? Right. So this is our first field of lights. It was a test at home in your own
And then it took
acreage.
This is a whole range of works that I did, and Field of Light is one of them. But the real something I never dreamed in my wildest dreams would ever happen. I was doing a radio. I had an installation at a at a museum in Bath, which is 20 miles from where I live, and there was a bit of press, and an Australian town. It was Alice Springs, which is Central Australia. They did a piece on it on the radio, and they did a phone interview with me from Alice to my studio. And the result was that a gentleman 2 days later phoned up from the Indigenous Land Corporation that looks after Uluru, Central Australia, and said, we would like to invite you to just come and discuss your field of light. And I couldn't believe it. So just to have a free trip back to Australia was, my wife was so jealous. She said, God, you jammy thing, going, anyway. Then that resulted in, and it took us 5 years to go from that period, from that opportunity to 4 years, because we had to get, when I went out there, I said, look, the landscape is huge. First of all, there were a lot of hurdles. The indigenous people, I didn't want to enforce anything on the indigenous people. So there was, I wanted them to understand that this was almost it was a thank you to the landscape. And I said, and they were extremely, or they have been extremely wonderful with it. They call it, there's an Aboriginal title for it, looking at many beautiful lights, and they are very, very wonderful people, because they really do feel landscape. I mean, they're so they're so sophisticated in their thinking about land, place and time, and actually they've been responsible for another range of work that I've been working on since, which is all to do with time. Their concept of time is past, present and future all rolled into one ball, or all into one form, whereas in the West we're very linear. We have past, present, future, and I think their concept is that's why they look after land, and because they get the idea that anything you do hurts. We have a responsibility to look after the future, and the only way we can do that is to live in the present responsibly. So I've learned a great deal from their culture.
So it's a huge achievement. 25 years in the making?
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
But be under no illusion, this is so many people touch this, and this isn't me. This is not false modesty. This is truth, and this is what we've got to really understand. We are not alone. We do not make art alone. We make it. Even the person painting in their studio, materials have to come in. Inspiration has to come in. For people to think that they're islands working alone is the most ridiculous idea, and it's again feeding into this ego world that we live in. We can't look at, for example, here, what we've achieved here. I say everybody. It's, Kelly and I have been talking for 2 years. There are hundreds of people whose labour and skills have come in to make this exhibition. So it is a little bit silly when people think it's down to one person, because it really isn't at all. Science would tell you the same. We are just atoms dancing together in this cloud of atoms. If we can only put our minds, every time you look at somebody, say, I am connected to you, and I am connected with the world around me, and I affect it, and they affect me. It just makes you look at life in a slightly different way.
So it seems to me, Bruce, you've talked some about natural spaces, but just how you've embraced these kinds of spaces and how you've sort of breathed life back into natural spaces. Tell us a little bit your thinking about gardens and nature. You did with Uluru, but we all have gardens near us and close to us.
Well, landscape for me is why I love working in landscape is The art is not secondary. Look, we're just doing these interventions for they're time-based. But the point of a garden is that they're beautiful places to come and be, just simply be and spend time. Preferably when nothing else is here but the garden. I shoot myself in the foot a little bit here, but what I would like you to appreciate is some people don't go to gardens, and I wouldn't say I was always a garden visitor, but the more and more, the older I get, I realise that we're spending an awful lot of time in this virtual world and not enough of it in the real world. And gardens they teach us so much. They're the museums of tomorrow, and they enrich us. They make us healthier. They're healthy for our brains. They're healthy for our bodies. And I felt that sometimes you can create these pieces of work to just, first of all, bring people's attention to a garden. It's almost, they're like spaces, interior spaces, but they're out exterior spaces. And simply said, I just feel they're lovely places to create work. And then when we've taken the work away and we've taken the last piece of material away, you've left the garden as you found it. And there's an opportunity for the next person to describe what their creations. So they are excellent places, and I think we need more of them actually. And Montalvo is. I know you. If you're already people who come here a lot, this is an exceptionally beautiful place, and particularly because it's got this wonderful arts program. For me, it's got it all.
I went to Scottsdale with Kathleen. We got the opportunity to meet you. We sat with you with a coffee, with your sketchbook, and we described Montalvo. And I think something that's fascinating is, we're a public park, so we're open to the public. We saw them this morning, folks are coming all the time to spend time just in these gardens. And activating the gardens with art is our highest goal. And so all of these works which illuminate at night have a very strong presence during the day. I'd say all but a couple that you can't see. So we invited you to come and stay with us. Invited you to stay in the residency, which are these very modern cottages that we have for artists. And you arrived in the evening. And you tell us a little bit about Montalvo and what inspired you when you arrived here?
Well, I arrived in the evening, in the dark, and so I was, wondering. I'd never been to this part of California before, so I had no idea what to expect. And in the morning, I woke up probably fairly early, and I walked from the small cottages where I was staying up that road through the woods, and the first thing I saw actually was the beware of mountain lions. I'm not known for doing selfies, but I did a selfie to my kids saying, God, I could be eaten. And maybe that was that. No, then I went up the path. I was actually quite relieved when I saw the lawns, and no, I just went, oh my God, this is. I've been here before. I saw the house, Montalvo. To my right, and then to the left was because you come out next to the Italianate garden, and I wandered through these sort of big gates, and it just felt it did more kind of this Narnian sense came to me. I'd realised that the house immediately was this magician's house that occurs in the in the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. And I'd made some Narnian pieces before, a couple of pieces, which, so my mind is often thinking about those childhood memories and thoughts. And so I wandered around a little bit on my own. Then I found my way into the house. And, this feeling was very strong in me. And lo and behold, I came up upon that stained glass window with the sailing ship. Now, that is the Dawn Treader. And I just went, this is crazy. This is really, And then I met up with Kelly and Kathleen. And I think I said to you then, I said, I know what we're going to do. It's a Narnian theme, which I'd never done before, and I've always kind of wanted to, but that was it.
It's Narnia.
It's Narnia.
Fantasy. We have our portals.
Yeah.
Tell us just a little bit your interest in Narnia, because I think it's they're important stories, and we've talked a lot about them with our docents and amongst our staff.
The importance for me isn't really the childhood version of it. It's C.S. Lewis. You can read these books as an adult and obviously as a child. One of the things that fascinates me, and I don't want to sound morbid, but death is something that we all have to. We know we come into the world, and we know we leave the world. And the one thing about Narnia, for me, C.S. Lewis talks quite a lot about that journey, and the threshold of from one life into another. So there are several pieces of work here which are talking about that threshold. One is the Silver Sea that you will see on the lawn here, which is when the ship, the Dawn Treader, comes to the end of that world, and C.S. Lewis uses this device of a sea of lilies, and the water of the sea goes from saline to fresh water. It just as a child, it completely got my imagination. There was something extremely strange about that device, because white in bright sunlight is extremely strange. It's like snow, but it's not snow, it's floating on water. So there's lots of sort of strange physical things and visual things going on. And the other thing is this wave that he describes, this still wave. This is a wave which is used as the door. The lilies are the threshold, and the wave is the door from that life in Narnia to Aslan's world. And there is, I don't know if any of you read these books, but if you haven't, I thoroughly recommend them. There is this valiant mouse called Reepicheep, who his whole goal in life is to make it to Aslan's land, which is, the next life. And in a sense, what it is to face death without fear, to think about death every day. And I said, not in a morbid way, because in the West, certainly we don't think about death enough. And I think we are very fearful of death, and I think that's a very dangerous and sad thing. We should be talking about it a lot more, and maybe we could be kinder to each other and ourselves by discussing it more. So there is some serious sides from me, hopes that some of these pieces will help people resolve some of those issues, or at least get them talking and starting to think about it.
So this is an image for those of you who've read the Chronicles. This is that ever-burning lamppost. It's in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and it's the very first sort of portal into this world of fantasy. And you may have seen on your drive in this morning our ever-burning lamppost. You want to speak about it just a moment?
This is really simply, slightly being, playing around with the idea. I love the lamppost actually was created as a protector to Narnia. And C.S. Lewis very cleverly made logic of it in the 5th book, The Magician's Nephew, by explaining how that came into being. What happened, in fact, was a portion of lamppost was one of the iron bars was planted in the earth in that land right at the beginning of that land's life, And at that time, anything you planted would grow. And I thought that was just such a lovely idea, that you could plant a piece of a metal lamppost in the ground, and the next day, 24 hours later, you had a fully fledged illuminated lamppost. And I guess what I wanted to do was I just started to question, I wonder what a lamppost seed looks like. This is basically, it's an icosahedron, which is a 20-sided solid. There are 19 lampposts, because one of the vertical is the structural base or stand. And that's all it is, really. But it is actually, it's my way of saying, look, I'm going to build something that will protect a place. It's a sort of very, very gentle, and we live in difficult times at the moment, and anything we can do to give ourselves that feeling of safety and protection, I think is kind of quite nice.
And we placed it right at the entrance.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to take you through all the works, but this is another portal that's been created, another piece that was created around our historic villa. This is the Dawn Treader we spoke of. This is the San Salvador, actually.
Yeah. Well, that was the window that did it, and funny enough, I don't know if you're familiar with Peter Blake. He's a pop artist in the 60s, British painter, and I just love that kind of playing around. So we've done a technique here of it's projection mapping. So it's all done on a computer, and what I did is I looked at the structure of the window, not only the actual leading of the stained glass, but the actual structural. You've got panes which you have to, when you backlight that at night, I noticed that those show as well. So we've just had a little bit of a gameplay with that, and created a loop of film that. The idea is that the window dissolves, and then suddenly that ship will appear and disappear. And it's just meant to be a fun contemporary play on using a piece of stained glass window.
And another portal.
Another portal.
So you mentioned Peter Blake, and I think it's important to just go back to even the Gathering of Clans with the cockatoos and understand how many layers and how many inspirations come into your various works. This
Silver Sea
is an inspiration for Silver Sea.
Yeah.
But you brought me back to a place and a love of this work.
This is Georgie O'Keeffe, Above the Clouds. I saw it I think she's done a number of these paintings, but when I saw that, I just think her work is fantastic. I've always loved her work. When I first saw that, I went, my God, that's C.S. Lewis's Lilies. And there's something rather lovely, because his lilies were about that transition to heaven in that world, and this is Georgie O'Keeffe painting our real sense of heaven, above the clouds. So there's something rather lovely about that. And as I said, aside from us not working individually, because we need each other so much, also, an artist cannot possibly dream up something from nowhere. Other art is always in your mind, other things, experiences in life. So I think you should always be, sometimes it's subliminal and you don't remember where that came from, but, everything has come from something. And I love the fact that Georgie O'Keeffe has helped me create something.
And as a painter, I love what she inspired in you.
Yeah, I think this is going back to the water analogy. When I was in Sydney, I used this sense of water to, because I grew up by the sea, water has always been my touchstone. So I found myself one day in Sydney, away from my family for a couple of years then, and I think I might have been about 26, and I remember how the light on the water changed my mood from being down in the dumps to at one with the world. And it then resulted in me remembering that I'd written, I noted that in a sketchbook, and then years later when I was thinking about what subject matter, what I could do to create pieces of work, I remembered that moment of sitting by the water and having my mood changed. And I do believe that I'm really fascinated by place and time and the emotion or the feeling that you had for those moments. So I'm always trying to bring back those moments, but to describe to others, because we've all had those moments.
Thank you. So this is the Silver Sea. This is the front lawn. I think something delightful in it is a sea. You look down, they're lilies, but in the evening they're also the sea. They're also those bits of light captured on the top of water. Your use of materials is incredible. Where your hand is sort of gently placed in the materials is incredible. And you and I were talking the other day about water and a new project you're working on. And I'd like you just to talk about it, because I think it's an interesting way to think about the material.
Well, water, I've been working with these ideas about water and memory for a while now, and then it occurred to me that water just playfully, imagine it absorbing light and history. So at the moment I'm working on a project where I'm creating a virtual sea using the CDs, but they're all actually completely mounted on perfectly in these, using these stands that we've developed to hold them in at 45 degrees. And I worked out that we could actually project by using these programmable spotlights. If you get enough of them together, you can cover a vast area. And I'm taking moments of time, filming those, and then abstracting them down to very simple sequences, sound and light sequences, and projecting those onto the discs, and that reflects onto the walls and the ceiling and the people who walk by it. And it's like water is absorbing history, and then it's letting that history back out again. So you can tell the story of a space over thousands of years. It's not really the time element. It's just that I love that idea of it breathing back history, the feelings that might have, a sunny day would have given you, or and there's not narrative with this, and it's not like I'm not trying to capture language or anything. I'm just trying to capture feeling, if that makes sense.
I love the idea that water holds memory, and it just rings true to me when you said it. It's really beautiful. We have our own bit of water that took a village to create.
Yeah.
So this is a Reepicheep's wave, that little valiant mouse on the tip of his wave. It's about 13,000 fiber optics nearly. And
1,300.
1,300,
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah.
We keep doing
Yeah.
that, right? And 18,000 mussel shells.
That's one.
And I'm just going to give you a detail of it. Again, once we're done with this conversation, you're welcome to walk through the gardens and see all of the works during the day. But it is quite amazing. Again, it captures that moment of water and that feeling.
Well, the structure of this was inspired by the. I'm very. I said try and get a very simple image. So it was the woodblock by the Japanese artist. I can never remember his.
Hokusai.
Yeah, Hokusai.
Hokusai.
Yeah, and it's one of it's an iconic image of a wave. It's called the wave or the Great Wave, and so I've based it on that. But it's almost like somebody's taken a cheese slice out of a wave. If you imagine a wave breaking on a shore, if you could freeze that moment and then do a three-dimensional cut of it, and then I thought, how am I going to actually make that, give that a form? And we do a lot of mussel picking in Cornwall in the summer with the kids. It's a really good activity. We all go down to the beach at low tide, pick mussels, and then come back and make a really big moule marinière, drink lots of wine. And it's one of my favourite activities of the summer. So the idea was to create a shell, an injection moulded shell. We've used a portion of recycled plastics. We wanted to use it totally 100%, but we couldn't because we couldn't get the actual the finish on the shell that we wanted. And then those are clipped onto these fibres. And actually what you do is by playing a light sequence through it, you can get this gentle movement. It's just to elevate the feeling that it's a still wave, but there is some sense of movement. And then we've added an audio track of what's called a shepherd's tone. And for those who don't know what it's like, the best way I can explain is there's an artist called M.C. Escher who, if you know his paintings or drawings of the stairs that continually go up and up and up, there's an optical illusion there. Well, this is an acoustic illusion. So if you stand out there and listen, you'll feel that the scale is going higher and higher and higher. In fact, what it's doing is looping round. And I felt that was a really good audible analogy of what was going on visually.
So this is another one of those works, Bruce, that has sat in the notebook and been looking for a place. And sometimes I say, it's a premiere here, but it's a sketch of something potentially to come.
Well, the one funny enough, when I was 24, just before I went to Australia, my father and I were watching some series of films on Australia. And there was a film by Peter Weir, who's an Australian filmmaker, called The Last Wave. And this was about a mythical tsunami that hit Sydney. And it was, you never see the wave in the film. Funny enough, when I remembered it later, I was sure you see the wave. But you never did. It's very clever. And I actually had nightmares about this wave. 8 years later, while I was on that same trip with Serena, the same time as Uluru, I found these sketches in my book about dreams that I'd had about being on the face of a wave, being drawn up, and it's like you go up and up and up, and then you just see the crest of the wave up there. Never quite. It's quite a fearful dream, and I didn't want to do that here because it wasn't the Narnian thing, and I didn't. I wanted to make this a joyful wave, and Reepicheep's wave is about joy, and it's that gateway into heaven. Whereas the Peter Weir wave, which I don't know whether I will do it actually, funny enough, what's the point of doing something that is black and not about optimism and maybe it was a young man's sort of,
Maybe this is
yeah.
it. It's fabulous. You will all have to come in the evening and see it. Because of time, I'm just going to take us through.
Okay.
Well, just one quick.
Okay.
Okay? Because language I know is important to you, and narrative I know is important to you. And you started a new series of work called the Light and Language series using Morse code. Can you just describe it a little bit?
This is really my look. I came to reading books. I was a slow reader as a kid, and when I discovered when you get reading and you want to describe things, and I love sort of as saying paying homage to the things that have inspired you. So words, equations. Just simple equations that you might have learned at school. I was trying to think, how can I involve those in pieces of work? And then I realized that actually by using printed code, and Morse code is, dots and dashes, and actually it's a great visual medium because you can play around with it. So I've created a series of projections all to do with music inspired by music or language, or poetry, and it's just again another sort of area that I've been exploring.
And as pattern, we have a group of works along this pavilion called Reflections.
Yeah, at night. So if you walk outside here at night, these are projected on the ground, and there is a sound. It's a sound light piece, and yeah, we'll see what you think.
So, and this is an equation for photosynthesis.
This is an equation for photosynthesis. I mean, as a kid, I had no idea what that all meant, but I just think it's beautiful, isn't it, that a scientist has worked out, you know. I mean, and it's actually why we breathe and why we're here. So this is a sort of thank you to all the people who've actually been able to interpret that through science. And I guess I'm just trying to give it sort of bring it to a more visual description.
This is great. I'm going to give you a beautiful visual. This is a light shower in Salisbury Cathedral, and I think we're going to move on to the light shower that we've placed inside of our historic villa. This is actually a piece that was acquired for Montalvo, and we're delighted it will be here forever. So that's fantastic. This is a man who loves taking center stage.
They made me do that.
This is a man who loves telling you the inspiration
So
behind his work. So I thought it would be nice for you to just leave us with what you hope people will take away.
Without that. Look, I'm so grateful, Kelly, to be invited here, and thank you all very much for coming along. Look, I'm on a journey. I just want to do more of this sort of thing. I hope that you, when you see the exhibition, you go home with a happy heart and a smile on your face. That's about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Bruce talked about this as a place for people to come together and creating spaces for people to come together. It's what we've seen. I think for us to take a moment, step back, and spend some time thinking about wonder and beauty and joy is absolutely important, and it feels like this exhibition is a gift for our community. I'm very excited to share it with everybody. I have a small gift for you. It's silly, but this is our bird.
Oh my God.
It's a little stellar jay from Montalvo, and the stellar jays are the ones that take the acorns and keep growing the forest and making sure that those oaks will continue to grow. And it's blue.
Oh.
And we know you love blue.
Yeah, it's the first day I've had a pink shirt on.
I love the pink shirt, but it does have a little blue in the collar, so it's perfect.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I've got one for all of the Munros because it's now a family organization.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
So Bruce will be here for a little while, and he's got books, and happy to sign them, happy to say a hello. I'm going to refrain from taking questions simply because we ran out of time. Okay? Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much.